They didn't tell me I was replaced. They just removed my name from the launch schedule and moved me to workflow support. No project, no team, no timeline. It was during a Tuesday morning meeting. Routine, tight agenda, no room for questions. I noticed it when the new assignment chart came up. Jessica Lynn was now listed under Rollout Lead. I waited for someone to clarify, to correct it. No one did. Jessica was an intern, 2 months in, still shadowing people last week. Now she was leading a $3 million server launch. And me? I was sitting at the back of the room, watching a project I had built from scratch be handed off without acknowledgement. No one looked at me. Not even Evan. He was the new boss. 6 months in, all speed and buzzwords. He didn't like process. He liked momentum. I once flagged a critical risk and he laughed, said, "Let's not overthink, Rachel." So I stopped overthinking. After the meeting, I got a generic message from HR. As part of role alignment, compensation adjustments have been processed. I read it 3 times. They cut my salary by 22%. Effective immediately. No meeting, no explanation, just a smaller number on the same system. I spent the next hour not asking why, because I already knew. Jessica wasn't just some intern. She was the daughter of the CEO's oldest friend. A favor hire, meant to observe, to learn, to smile politely and stay quiet. But now, with the right push from Evan, she'd been placed at the center of the company's biggest technical rollout. Not because she earned it, not because she was ready, because someone wanted to impress the person at the top. And Evan, well, he was smart enough to know how the game worked. He just assumed I'd be too proud, too silent, or too scared to play it back. He assumed wrong. My name is Rachel Mendez. I'm 42. I've worked here for 7 years. I don't network. I don't sell myself. But I build things that don't break. I lead teams that don't panic. I've launched 5 major platforms without a single rollback. I'm not perfect, but when things go sideways, people come find me. That afternoon, I didn't save any files. I didn't back anything up. I scheduled a coffee break. Marcus from the training department joined me. Most people forgot he existed, but he saw everything. The documents passed around without review, the interns who skipped protocol, the shortcuts managers took without asking legal. Not a gossip, just someone who listened closely and remembered details others missed. I didn't tell him what to look for. I just asked a question. "Hey, are you seeing any strange changes in the launch folder lately? Might be worth flagging before it gets messy." He raised an eyebrow. Then he smiled, said, "I'll take a look." That was all I needed, because if Evan was going to cut me out, I wouldn't fight it. I'd let his decisions stand on their own, long enough to fall. And this time, when they did, someone else would be watching. Jessica was fast, not precise, not grounded, just fast. 3 days after taking over the launch plan, she changed the folder structure, renamed key documents, and deleted 2 workflows that had been used in the last 4 system rollouts. She said they were cluttered. I knew they were safeguards. She shortened the deployment timeline by 40%. She cut the test cycle down to a single pass. She removed 2 reviewer roles completely, roles that existed not for formality, but because someone once lost a client over a minor error those steps would have caught. But Jessica didn't know that, and Evan never asked. He applauded her in the next team meeting. "She's taking initiative. We need more of this." Someone from QA raised a concern. A junior tech quietly pointed out that certain validations were missing. Evan waved them off. "We're not here to babysit files. Let's get this done." I watched it all happen from the side. My calendar had been cleared out. I was technically on internal workflow optimization, which meant no real assignments. But my chat window still pinged now and then. One of the first was Marcus. "You still tracking how the deployment log's being handled? It looks thinned." I answered only once. Not my project anymore. But I knew he would look deeper. He always did, and he wasn't the only one. 3 days later, Priya from IT support messaged, "Sorry to bother, Jessica just requested admin access to the old rollback scripts. It still says you're listed as the file owner. Should I transfer it?" I told her no. "I'm no longer involved. Please forward that to Evan directly." Priya said nothing else, but I knew she understood. She'd been around long enough to smell when someone was walking on ground that hadn't been cleared. Jessica, meanwhile, kept moving. She stripped out every note that wasn't hers. She wrote summaries with no reference links. She repackaged the launch folder like it was a class presentation. Clean headers, no clutter, no context. And every document she posted still had my name in the metadata. Maybe she didn't know how to change it. Maybe she didn't care. But someone else would care when it broke. She even replaced the fallback checklist with a slide deck. A deck, not a document. It had bullet points like establish backup protocol if needed and alert IT if error persists. There were no systems listed, no timelines, no contact roles. When I mentioned this, carefully, to a QA lead I used to work with, she blinked and said, "Wait, that's the only version? There's no attached procedure?" I shook my head. I didn't elaborate. 2 days later, Evan announced that launch was moving up by a week. Jessica smiled. Evan nodded proudly. I got another ping from Marcus. The final testing gate just got merged into deployment. I checked the history, no approval trail, it's gone. I still didn't say anything directly, but I made sure Marcus had a copy of the old review matrix, the one with all 5 validation steps, the one that was used on every launch since 2019, the one Jessica never opened. I didn't give it to him. I just reminded him where to look, and he did. Jessica wasn't malicious. She simply didn't know what she was erasing. She thought building fast was the same as building strong. Evan let her, because he didn't care about the system. He cared about praise from the CEO. So I waited, not watching every file, not checking every meeting, just staying where people who knew how to read patterns could still reach me, because something was going to crack. And when it did, they wouldn't remember who planned the launch. They'd remember who warned them it couldn't survive shortcuts. There was one part of the system they never touched. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't labeled clearly. It didn't sit inside the main deployment folder, it was tucked under an old archive, a set of configuration logs used to test the server handoff between 2 regions. Forgotten after the last upgrade, but it still ran. Quietly, once a week, it pinged every endpoint, checked connection speed, flagged delays, and sent a report automatically to one shared mailbox. And the mailbox still had my name as a recipient. Jessica never looked at it. Evan didn't know it existed, but Ben did. Ben worked in ops, not technical, not strategic, just the guy who watched the heartbeat of the system, the one people ignored until something blinked red. He forwarded me a report one afternoon. FYI, your name's still on this, thought it might be legacy, didn't want to delete. I opened the file. And there it was, line 42, latency spike in West Node, rollback protocol not detected. It meant nothing to someone like Jessica, but I'd seen it before. It was the first sign that someone had disabled a fallback route, the digital version of removing an emergency exit and calling it streamlined. I didn't reply to Ben. I didn't warn anyone. But I archived that report, not to save it, to remember the time, because everything in tech breaks eventually, but only a few things leave traces. Meanwhile, Jessica had started giving presentations. Branded slides, launch slogans, talking points. She talked about agility, velocity, ownership. None of it made the system safer. QA had been pushed to the side. The project was now developer-led. The same developers who didn't understand the rollback tags or why the schedule had 2 clocks instead of 1. Jessica had deleted the backup time buffer, called it dead weight. I didn't attend the meetings, but I saw the summaries. Marcus sent me one with a quiet note. They're saying it's fully tested, but nobody's seen a load test in 2 weeks? Priya confirmed it. She archived the logs last week, says they're confidential. Ben asked if I wanted to be removed from the heartbeat reports. I told him not yet. Just until the launch, then I'm fully out. He didn't ask why, because by now, 3 different people had seen 3 different cracks. Jessica didn't notice. She was busy preparing a demo for the board. Evan was coaching her, probably imagining how it would look when she presented the launch success to the CEO. He didn't ask who set up the test layers, didn't check who the alerts went to, didn't know that the system, even in silence, still had my fingerprints. But someone would ask, because you can scrub a schedule, clean a folder, rename a document, but you can't replace the person who remembered why it was there in the first place. It was never about the demo. Not really. Jessica had been rehearsing all week. Hallway pacing, mock slide clicks, the soft pivot from metrics to messaging. She spoke in polished phrases, delivered confidence with clean visuals. She didn't build the system, but she carried herself like she had. Evan sat just off center, arms crossed, smiling. He didn't say much, but his presence signaled this wasn't just a status update. This was a performance. And the audience? Carefully curated. No QA lead, no tech ops, no system architect. Only Marcus in the back corner assigned to observe, and Priya invited for recording support, though no one checked if she pressed record. There was also a man in gray, seated 2 chairs from the end of the table. Badge tucked, neutral expression. Just Neil from Ridge Partners, the investment side. Jessica opened with load times, response rates, cloud redundancy. She clicked quickly, never lingering long enough for questions. Her slides had arrows. Labels like optimized flow, screenshots from dashboards, color-coded but unlabeled. No one interrupted. Evan nodded through every word, every bullet. Twice he leaned forward as if preparing to speak, then didn't. He didn't need to. Jessica was saying exactly what he wanted them to hear. Marcus later told me the moment things shifted was so quiet he almost missed it. Jessica had just explained that the rollback protocol was now fully automated. She said it confidently, but someone, Neil, glanced sideways, then raised his hand. He didn't speak loudly. He asked simply, "What's the fallback trigger logic?" Jessica blinked. It wasn't long, but long enough. "It's built into the primary config, the one syncing all environments." It sounded official, but the primary config had been deprecated 2 weeks earlier. Marcus didn't correct her. Neither did Priya, but Neil didn't write anything for the next minute. He just sat, watching. After the demo, there were no congratulations, just small nods, polite exits. 1 or 2 execs avoided eye contact entirely. The silence felt deliberate. Jessica smiled anyway. Evan patted her shoulder as they walked out. Neither of them seemed to notice that Neil stayed behind. He didn't ask for clarification. He asked for logs. When Priya opened the deployment folder, she found duplicates. Multiple versions, several renamed, no timestamp trail. One validation sheet had no author tag. Another was missing half the checklist. She flagged it quietly but said nothing. Yet. That night, Marcus messaged me. Neil asked where the fallback plan came from, said it didn't match Ridge protocol, and from Priya later. Evan just asked me if I could backdate a log. I didn't answer. I didn't tell them what to do. I didn't need to. Jessica had deleted the safety net. Evan had helped her hang the curtain. But the foundation was still mine. And enough people remembered that. I wasn't the one raising alarms. I didn't need to. I'd built something durable enough that when it cracked, the noise would come from everyone who'd trusted it not to. The first warning didn't come from a crash, it came from a delay. Ben spotted it at 2:17 a.m., a sync drift between 2 server regions. Nothing fatal, nothing show-stopping, but enough to trigger an alert deep inside a deprecated layer of the system, one that hadn't been touched in over a year. Jessica had disabled the reference weeks ago, but she hadn't deleted the script itself because she hadn't known it existed. The alert was quiet, logged to a shadow folder, copied to a private backup, forwarded by automation to just 2 people, me and Ben. By 9 a.m., he'd already sent a message to Jessica's team. No one replied. By noon, he walked into Marcus's corner with a single sentence. "Something's off. It's not broken, but it's not right." Marcus didn't ask for clarification. He nodded, closed his laptop, and walked straight to Priya. They started checking the archive. The folder they needed had been locked. Not deleted, just removed from indexing. Buried under layers of permissions. And still tagged with my name. Someone, Marcus guessed Jessica, had requested to wipe the entire structure the week before. The request had stalled. Ben had quietly marked it pending review. He didn't tell anyone why. He didn't have to. That afternoon, 3 things happened in under 30 minutes. Marcus forwarded a deployment log to audit, not for confirmation, but for timestamp validation. Priya restored a metadata record that showed which files had been downloaded, modified, and replaced over the last month. And Ridge's observer, Neil, requested access logs for rollback directories dating back 90 days. Jessica wasn't informed. Evan was. His reaction was immediate and misdirected. He called a stand-up, pulled in Marcus and Priya, and demanded clarity. "If there's an issue, bring it to me. Don't escalate outside the team." Priya didn't respond. Marcus said only, "There's nothing outside, just gaps inside." Later, he told me his hands were sweating the whole meeting, but his voice didn't crack. Jessica asked Evan what was happening. He brushed it off. Just over-communication. It'll pass. But it didn't pass, because that evening, Priya received an internal ping from audit. Not a form, not a threat, just a note. "We're reviewing rollback coverage. Noticed gaps." She replied. It was streamlined under Evan's direction. Validation checklist was removed. They replied, "Was it approved?" There was no record of approval. Jessica had overwritten the checklist without submitting a new one. Evan had fast-tracked the demo without formal sign-off. And now, two departments, Tech Ops and Audit, were looking at the same missing layer. Marcus called me that night, not for advice, just to tell me, "They're asking about your old version of the fallback." I didn't give it to them, but I told them it existed. I thanked him. That was all. He hesitated before hanging up. "Rachel, if they start asking where it broke," I stopped him. "Let them ask." Because the truth was no longer hidden. It was just scattered, waiting for someone to pick it up. Jessica had no idea how many pieces she'd cut loose. Evan thought control meant volume. And the others? They had started to choose, not sides, just distance. Because the closer they stood to the pressure, the more it felt like something underneath was going to burst. When everything began to fall apart, they didn't realize it at once. There wasn't a dramatic crash or a server-wide alert. It was slower than that, like a quiet unraveling thread at the edge of a system too clean for its own good. It began with a request from Ridge. Neil had sent a simple note through the CEO's assistant, asking for one file, the official rollback approval from the last system update. Not the document Jessica had used in her presentation. The real one, the one that should have carried a timestamp, a signature, and a full validation trail. Priya was the one who received the request. She opened the folder marked Final and saw what she expected. Diagrams, renamed logic flows, a rollout plan stripped down to essentials. But the metadata didn't match. The files had no signature, no formal reviewer, no approval date. She checked the logs. The validation checklist had been modified but never routed. It wasn't just a mistake. It had never been submitted. Jessica, as it turned out, had assumed Evan would handle it. Evan had assumed it wasn't necessary. And both of them had moved so quickly that no one had stopped to ask who was actually responsible for ensuring any of it was real. Marcus tried to help. He went looking for an older version, one he remembered being used during the earlier deployment. He found a cached copy of the previous checklist. The version was mine. The routing history showed it had been approved, reviewed, and uploaded properly 6 months before. The timestamp was intact. My name was still on it. Priya ran a comparison between the two versions. The new one had fewer steps, no fallback triggers, no review chain. It was clean, but hollow. She flagged the differences, marked the missing fields, and uploaded the side-by-side to the audit workspace. Then, without comment, she CC'd the CEO. No one told Evan. No one warned Jessica. But the board began to ask questions, not through email chains or public channels, but through direct calls that bypassed them entirely. One of the directors reached out to Marcus directly, another messaged Priya. And late that evening, I got a short call from HR. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't mention the past. They just asked if I was available to walk through the original rollback framework that had been submitted earlier in the year. I said yes. They didn't call it a reinstatement. Not officially. But Marcus told me later that Evan had been removed from all deployment review threads that same night. Jessica still didn't understand what had gone wrong. She thought the issue was optics, too many eyes on an internal process. She didn't grasp that what they'd broken wasn't the system itself, but the trust underneath it. The approval she assumed would be there never existed. They had streamlined too much, cut corners they didn't understand, and when asked to prove anything, they had nothing real to show. By the time I stepped back into the room, no one was looking for apologies. They were looking for someone who could walk them through what had been built and why it had worked before it was erased. I didn't gloat. I didn't correct them. I just opened the old document, clicked through the fields, and said quietly, "This is what was approved." Everything else was a draft that never should have left staging. And for the first time since I'd been pushed aside, the room didn't blink. They listened. When they asked me to return, they didn't offer a title. They offered a folder. It was a compressed archive, pulled from a server they thought had already been wiped. The label said backup, but the contents were a mosaic of broken logic. Half-deleted triggers, misaligned version stamps, and 3 duplicate files all claiming to be the final build. Jessica had been methodical in her removal, but not precise. She'd overwritten structure without understanding which lines of code had dependencies beneath them. She hadn't rewritten the system, she'd amputated it. The first thing I did was search for the rollback module. It was still there. Frayed, renamed, disconnected from the core, but alive. I restored a clean copy from the archive Ben had saved. I didn't say anything out loud. I didn't need to. The system ran a self-check. 6 flags appeared, 4 of them were marked critical. Marcus watched over my shoulder. He said quietly, "That's why Neil kept circling back." He saw the versioning inconsistencies. Priya joined 5 minutes later. She'd traced a discrepancy in user permissions. Jessica had pushed updates through Evan's admin login. None of the pushes had multi-party approval. She hadn't just broken protocol. She'd hidden the break under someone else's authority. When I presented the restored rollback path to infrastructure, no one argued. No one blinked. They just adjusted their chairs and listened. Jessica wasn't in the room. Evan was, but he didn't speak. He looked like someone who finally understood that silence didn't protect him anymore. Later that afternoon, Jessica requested a meeting with the CEO. She called it a clarification. What she wanted was a shield. She said the process had been collaborative, that the system she submitted was a streamlined evolution of legacy work, that she had consulted the team. She never named me directly, but she didn't have to. She said the original was too slow, that it lacked flexibility. What she didn't say was that it had worked, and that hers hadn't. The CEO listened, no reaction, no response, just a stillness I'd only seen once before, when we lost a data center during a citywide outage and had to reroute every packet manually for 6 hours. That same night, Audit released a draft summary. The words were careful, professional, but the meaning was clear. Rollback structure submitted on launch week was inconsistent with validated architecture. No record of approval. Partial overwrite confirmed. Lead signatory absent. Recommended course, revert to last approved protocol. No name was mentioned, but my initials were on the last approved version. And Jessica's weren't on anything at all. The rewrite had been public, loud, packaged with slides and slogans. But what they couldn't erase, what no new voice could cover, was the trail left by something that had once worked too well to disappear quietly. The failure wasn't sudden. It had been visible all along. They just didn't think anyone was watching. They didn't fire her, not officially, not in the way that made headlines or demanded public statements. Jessica kept her title for another 2 weeks. She attended meetings, she answered questions, but no one copied her on decisions anymore. The collapse wasn't dramatic. It didn't explode. It hollowed. The board received a second report from Audit, this time not as a summary, but as a timeline. Every override, every deleted file, every missing approval was listed. Not as a personal failure, but as an organizational one. Except one person's name kept appearing at the start of each correction. Mine. Ben's version logs. Priya's validation trace. Marcus's folder restoration. All of it pointed backward, to the last moment things still worked. And that moment never included Jessica's build. Evan tried to defend her, said she was under pressure, that legacy complexity was slowing everyone down. The CEO didn't disagree, but he didn't agree either. He asked for documentation, then for accountability, then for quiet. After that, Evan's role was restructured. He was no longer on the launch team. He retained his title but lost sign-off authority. His email signature changed. So did the tone of his calendar invites. He didn't leave, but the room changed when he entered. Jessica announced she was transitioning to a new opportunity. Her goodbye email was cheerful, distant, full of gratitude. She didn't mention the rollback, or the failure, or the part where she had overwritten a system she never built. She thanked the CEO for his vision. She called the experience formative. And she sent it before noon on a Friday. No one replied. Not because they were cruel, but because the damage had already soaked too far into the foundation to pretend nothing cracked. When I returned the handover package, I didn't ask for anything. I just placed it in the archive where the rest of the documentation lived. Marcus asked if I'd be staying on the project. I told him no. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vindicated. I was simply finished. Because when a structure collapses, not from outside force, but from within, you don't stay to rebuild it with the same people who insisted the cracks weren't real. The system worked again. The backup synced. The rollback passed testing. The alert script flagged nothing abnormal. Ben deleted the shadow logs with a small nod as if they'd done their job one last time. As I walked past the glass hallway where Jessica had once practiced her demo slides, I saw her desk. Empty, but not cleared. Her whiteboard still said streamlined delivery. The last word faded under weeks of marker dust, and in that moment, I didn't feel triumph. Just closure. I didn't stay. Not on payroll, not on contract, but I didn't disappear either. After the rollback stabilized and the launch passed its third audit review, I stepped back. Not out of bitterness. By then, I had none left. What lingered was quieter, something more like clarity. Marcus still messaged me sometimes. Ben too. Usually small things. Questions about archived versions, logic layers, protocol decisions I'd made years ago and barely remembered. I always answered. Brief, to the point, no opinion unless asked. Then, 3 weeks after Jessica left, a junior dev from an unrelated team sent me a message. He was working on a new framework. Modular, high resilience, cross-deployable. He wanted to know why our rollback had survived multiple iterations without breaking. I didn't say, because I built it right. I said, because we built it to survive change without permission. 2 days later, he invited me to join a private working group. Not formally, not on record. Just a few engineers trying to map best practices from past systems. They weren't chasing credits. They were chasing comprehension. That's when I knew. What stayed wasn't my name. It was the trace of logic that had held through the worst conditions. It was the resilience they couldn't overwrite. It was the warning layer that failed quietly, and then saved everything. One afternoon, I opened a proposal draft from the new team. They'd lifted parts of the rollback model, referenced legacy commits, and written this in the header, based on the original fault-tolerant framework by R. Shaw and J. Mercer. Jessica's name was still there. I didn't delete it. Instead, I highlighted each section she had touched and annotated where logic had fractured. Not to shame her, to show the cost of careless edits, to trace failure as a map, not a weapon. I sent the file back without comment. 3 days later, I received an email from the CEO's office. Not from an assistant, not a generic acknowledgement. It was one line with a subject that read only, "The work mattered." And beneath it, just this. "Thank you, Rachel." Numphrey. It wasn't framed, it wasn't public, it didn't rewrite history, but it proved someone had noticed who built what and who never claimed to. I never gave a final presentation. There was no slide deck, no speech, no standing ovation. I didn't need one. My goodbye wasn't scheduled. It happened the way all real endings do, quietly, without announcement, carried in the rhythm of people moving on. Ben eventually archived the last of the rollback documentation. Marcus forwarded a cleaned-up version to infrastructure. Priya closed out the audit request with a note that read simply, "Restored to original compliance, no outstanding flags." No one said Rachel fixed it. They didn't have to. In meetings I wasn't in, my diagrams were still pulled up. In threads I wasn't copied on, lines of my logic were still referenced. Not to glorify, not to defend. Just because they worked. That was enough. A month later, I visited the office. Not for work, but to see an old colleague who was retiring. I walked past the new operations space. Glass doors, noise-canceling panels, younger faces, fewer titles. One wall was covered with printouts, system maps, flowcharts, version histories. At the center, pinned slightly off balance, was a diagram from 2 years ago. Mine. It had notes written in 3 colors of ink. Some circled, some questioned, none erased. Above it, someone had taped a single sheet. Things that failed when we ignored them. I didn't step in. I didn't correct anyone. Outside, near the elevators, I ran into Priya. We hadn't spoken since the day she'd sent the side-by-side rollback comparison to audit. She asked if I had a minute. I nodded. She said she'd been thinking about the early days. The ones before Jessica, before Evan, when it was just the team trying to build something stable enough to handle a disaster they couldn't predict. Then she looked at me and said softly, "You never said it, but I know it now. You weren't protecting the code. You were protecting us. I didn't answer. I didn't know how. She smiled once, then added, They're still reading your commit notes, even the sarcastic ones. We both laughed. When I left, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I'd won. What I felt was simpler, calmer. I had been removed, undermined, replaced. But the thing they tried to bury was still breathing, and it no longer needed me to defend it. Some systems are built to scale, some are built to last, and some are built so well, even the wrong hands can't fully break them. I hadn't stayed to prove a point. I had stayed long enough for the truth to resurface. And then I had let go. Because legacy isn't what people remember. It's what they still use when no one's watching.